This is a Santorini earthquake update for the 18th of February 2025, and the key point today is that the epicenters are moving. This video is based on an article on strikeengine.com, link in the video description, and in that link there's links to the source information that I use in this video. In this earthquake update, I'll go through what has happened today as of 9:21 GMT. I'll put some numbers to the crust movements that I used yesterday in yesterday's update, and then I'm also going to do a bit of a deep dive, bit of speculation on the cause of these earthquakes, what is actually happening. An east-northeasterly movement of earthquake activity is what we are seeing over the last day or two. Until now, the majority of the quakes have been to the west of Anidros Island, but most of the quakes over the last few days have moved to the east of the island. So there is a graphic on the article. You can see here pink is 6 hours, red 12, orange 24. So you can see we've got loads of greens here, which is 48 hours ago or more, and then we're seeing a lot of purples and reds happening in the last 6 to 12 hours, well, the last day basically, especially over the last 24 hours. This trend we can see in the middle, that's Anidros Island, it's uninhabited, so we can see that the swarm is sort of moving around in this direction, it's kind of surrounding this island. Earthquake intensity for the 18th of February so far, at the time of the article, 9:21 GMT, we have had a 4.3, 3.8, a 5, a 3.6 and a 4.9. In total there's been 12 earthquakes over 3 Richter already, and we can see where those earthquakes have occurred. Again, most of the earthquakes before have been sort of in this area to the west of Anidros, and then we're seeing these big ones. These are all 3+ magnitude from today only, and you can see they're all happening on the opposite side, they're happening on the east side. So that is what I mean when I say the epicenters are moving. I'm not sure what that means, but they're moving nevertheless. We've also got the data here for all the earthquakes that have happened. See, a lot of them are at 2 kilometers. You don't see any rated at less than 2, maybe 2 is the limit. 10, 2s, 4, so they're shallow as well. And they're bigger, 3.6 at 2 kilometers. This graph shows the energy being released has doubled over the past couple of days. So this is like the average, what we would expect, cumulative energy over time, the normal amount. When the earthquake started, that's gone up to a plateau. It looked like it was going to be coming down, but we've had this uptick again this morning. I'm not sure if this includes this morning's earthquakes, that they could be in it, but either way we are seeing, even if they are included, it's worrying to see like an uptick like this again, even though the increase, well, actually the increase is more than yesterday because this scale is logarithmic, so that's not a good sign at all. With regards to crust movements, I said here in yesterday's article, I just gave this map basically of the southern Aegean, shows Santorini, Amorgos and Ios Island, just with arrows. So I thought I'd do a bit better job today, and I'll put actual numbers to it. So what we've got here is Santorini. The red indicates that this is the opposite of its normal direction, so it's moved 60 millimeters north in the last 30 days. The easterly movement has also accelerated, and it's actually coming down. It's not rising any longer. It did at the start of the quake swarm, but it started to reduce. Amorgos Island, this is probably actually closer to the epicenter, the closest inhabited island to the epicenter. We're seeing this increase to a 7 millimeter increase in it's moved 7 millimeters further to the south. It has a southerly movement generally, Amorgos, but that 7 millimeters in 30 days is more than what you'd expect. Usually this island is moving in an easterly direction. It's moved 16 millimeters west in the last 30 days. It's also increased in height by 15 millimeters. And then we come on to Ios, which is, along with Santorini, the biggest change. It's moving north now, and it's moving west instead of its normal southeasterly direction. 16 millimeters has moved to the north, and 50 millimeters to the west, and it's also increased in height by 8 millimeters. So we're seeing the ground rising in this area, dropping in this area. There are other GNSS stations, but they're quite a bit further away than this. Again, I said in yesterday's article, I've checked them again today. I don't really see any unusual activity. So this movement that we're seeing in these islands in the crust is localized to this area. I say here, I'm not sure what it means about this changing in direction and relatively big movements. Normally we're looking at a millimeter a year, 2 millimeters a year maybe, and we're seeing these kind of movements. I said I don't know what it means, but logically, if we've got this crust moving in this direction, this crust moving in an opposite direction, and we've got this one heading down, logically you'd expect there to be some stress in the crust here and some earthquakes. It's not surprising that we're seeing earthquakes, let me say that. And now I go into some speculation. This is complete and utter speculation, guys. I am not a geologist, volcanologist, seismologist. So bear that in mind with what I'm about to tell you. What is the driver of these movements? What are some possible causes to these movements and movement changes that we're seeing? Let's look at Eos Island first. Why is Eos reversed direction and started to move west instead of its normal easterly direction? And is this movement dragging Amorgos west and Santorini north? Like, is the movement of Eos the driver for the movements that we're seeing? So if we say that we're moving north here and west, we could potentially say that it's leaving a gap here, and that could potentially cause Amorgos to accelerate south and Santorini to accelerate north to fill the gap that Eos is leaving. But I don't think it would really explain why we are seeing a 45 millimeter increase in speed for Santorini going in the opposite direction. I'm going to count out Eos. For that reason, I'm going to say that Eos is not the driver that we're looking for. Coming on to Amorgos Island, Amorgos has also reversed direction and started to move west instead of east, and its southerly speed has also increased. Would the movement of Amorgos explain why Eos has reversed its direction to the west? Yes, I think it would. If you've got Amorgos moving in this direction, you could see that moving Eos to the west. And would it explain Eos's movement to the north? No, I don't think so. So I think that rules out Amorgos, the driver of the movements of Santorini and Eos. I think Amorgos moving south by 7 millimeters doesn't really explain why Eos would start moving north, and definitely would not explain why Santorini's reverse direction started going north as well. So no, I don't think Amorgos, the movement of Amorgos, makes sense with regards to the movements of Santorini and Eos. So I'm going to rule out the movement of Amorgos as the driver of the movements of the islands. Looking at Santorini, the island has changed directions moving north. Could this drive the changes we are seeing in the direction of the other islands? So we're moving north. I suppose potentially that could explain the 16 millimeter north that we're seeing in Eos, but I don't see how that would explain Amorgos accelerating in a southerly movement if Santorini is also going in the opposite direction. So for that reason, I'm going to say that Santorini is not the driver of Amorgos's movement, and if we assume all this is connected, the movements of these three islands is connected, then I don't believe Santorini is the driver. So if we're assuming that Amorgos, Santorini and Eos are not the drivers of the earthquake movements or island movements, what does that leave us as an explanation? Well, we've got Anidros Islands at the centre of the earthquake swarm. Would an uplift or a down movement of the crust at Anidros explain the movements we are seeing? Like I said here, I think it's very difficult to say, so this is going to be some extreme speculation I'm going to go into here. So, Amorgos and Santorini are converging. Santorini has changed direction, it's starting to head north, and Amorgos is accelerating south. Granted, not as much, but it is moving south faster than normal, but Santorini is obviously the big one that's been affected. In other words, we could say Amorgos and Santorini are getting sucked towards Anidros. And the analogy that I've used here is it's like lifting the middle of a tablecloth. When you lift the middle of the tablecloth, the edges of the tablecloth get closer to the middle. So hypothetically speaking, if Anidros was rising, we could see that having a pulling effect on Santorini and Amorgos. Then looking at Eos in relation to Anidros, but we're not seeing Eos moving closer to Anidros Island. In fact, we're actually seeing it move further away. We're presuming that Eos and Anidros are moving further away from each other. Like this is going in this direction, and let's assume that Anidros is staying in the same place. What would cause, can we have uplift here and at the same time have Eos moving away? If we're saying Anidros rising could pull these two together, how does that, could that explain Eos moving further away? And what I've said here is, if we are seeing something pushing the crust apart between Anidros and Eos, that would explain the westerly movement of Eos. Is there evidence of a break in the crust between Anidros and Eos? Are we looking at a fault line here, perhaps, that is moving further apart? Is there a fault line here that's getting pulled apart, which would increase the distance of Eos from Anidros? And I think the answer is yes. This is all the 4 plus Richter quakes over the past 30 days, and we see Anidros is there. So most of the quakes are to the west of Anidros, and for me that is indicating that potentially this is indicating a fault here along this line somewhere. And if we're having a fault, then potentially that fault is getting pulled apart, which would explain why Eos is getting further away from Anidros. So the conclusion, my hypothesis if you like, from the analysis above, I would speculate that we are seeing uplift, seismic or magmatic, around Anidros Island, and this is what is pulling Santorini and Amorgos closer to Anidros. Again, using the tablecloth example, I say it's a possibility. I say pulling is a possibility between Amorgos and Santorini, because we are not seeing any evidence of a break in the crust between Amorgos and Santorini. The epicenters that we are seeing are not forming a line from the northwest to the southeast. I mean, if we were seeing a line in this direction, then we could say that perhaps there's a break in the crust here, we've got a fault line, and then perhaps we wouldn't be able to see a pulling effect because the crust is expanding and not pulling the crust. But as we see it at the moment, assume we've got a fault line here, this crust is intact, this crust is intact, and if it's intact, then hypothetically a rise here would transfer its force to a pulling force on Santorini and Anidros. So I just said your uplift and Anidros could explain Santorini being pulled together, and then just to finish it off then, and the break in the crust, the fault to the west of Anidros, evidenced by the epicenters of the earthquakes that we're seeing, could also cause Eos to move further away from Anidros. So that's my hypothetical guess on what is happening here. We're seeing uplift here. We've got an intact crust going in this direction, so the uplift here is pulling Amorgos and Santorini together, and we've got a broken crust here, which is suggested by the earthquake swarm that we're getting. The epicenters, well, at least they have been to the west of Amorgos, to the west of Anidros Island. So it suggests we've got a fault here that's opening, and that would also explain Eos getting pulled to the west. So that's my hypothesis on what's going on, guys. I'd say we're seeing some sort of increase in height here, and coupled with the fault here, that explains the movement on the changes of movement of these islands. So did the earthquake cause the uplift or vice versa? I mean, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But if you're going to force me to guess, the fact that there have been so many earthquakes over such a long period of time leads me to believe, as a layman, that at least some of the energy is coming from magmatic movement. Some of the earthquake being released some of the energy being released by these earthquakes, at least some of it's coming from magmatic movement. I would say we would expect the strength of an earthquake swarm to decrease over time, because earthquakes are caused by stress in the crust. So generally speaking, the more quakes we have, the more stress is released and the less stress we have left in the crust. More earthquakes, less stress in the crust, smaller earthquakes in the future, if it's seismatic or solely seismatic, leading to smaller quakes. But we do not appear to be seeing this. Again, going back to what we said today, we've had many, I think we've had 8 over 4 Richter. Is that correct? We've had 8 over 4 Richter today. No, we've had 12 earthquakes over 3 Richter today, and we've had 1, 2, 3 over 4 Richter, and we've had a 5 today. And that is why I'm saying we do not appear to be seeing a reduction in the energy being released. In fact, it's going the other way. So I would guess we are seeing at least some magmatic pressure, at least in part, sustaining the energy for these earthquakes we are still seeing. So does this mean we will see a new volcano? Obviously, I've got no idea. I would presume the longer the swarm goes on for, without reducing in the amount of energy released, I would say the chances increase for some sort of magma release somewhere, gradual or otherwise. I say this because I imagine there is only so much energy and crushing the crust can deal with. At some point, I guess it's possible the crust is going to say enough is enough. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a vote, subscribe to the channel for more updates. Links again in the video description if you want to go and check the sources of what I'm using in these videos. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you again next time.